Submitted for your approval. Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension. Self.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Hello, hello, hello. You're listening to a podcast not only of sound, but also of mind. It's Time to Rewind is a podcast that takes a journey into a wondrous land of time loops whose boundaries are that of imagination. Each episode, my guest and I explore these time loops one loop at a time. This stop is Trapped in the Twilight Zone, and this is the first stop at 1985's Season 1, Episode 23's first segment, Shadow Play. Here with me once again is my guest, comedian and podcaster, Alice Lauren. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good as well. This is, interesting because this version of Shadow Play is at the same time very extremely similar to the 1961 version, but also very different.
Thank God. Yeah.
So what did you think about the 1985 version compared to the 1961 version?
I really liked it. I think I even like it better. I like that it kind of fleshed out some new details. Really gave me more to think about as, these characters are questioned. One of my favorite parts is when the DA's wife is questioned, like, oh, how long have you been married then? And she doesn't really have the memories. She can't really say, and it's, they're not as sentient as they think they are. And it really puts some doubt there. So I really loved more details. I loved more women in kind of stronger roles where they didn't have to be one note. That was definitely very interesting as well.
Yeah, in this one we get in his defense lawyer is now played by a woman. So instead of the press secretary and the DA, which were the two primary characters that were talking to each other away from him, it's now the DA and then his defense lawyer.
So they were working together. For some reason, I thought they were like lawyers of opposing counsel. I was really confused.
I mean, they're based because the DA was basically the prosecutor. He was the one arguing to get Adam Grant convicted, and then
Right.
she was his defense lawyer trying to save him from getting convicted.
Okay, perfect. I was right. I'm like, 'cause at first I was like, why is she coming over? Usually these lawyers aren't really, when they're on opposite sides, they're not really fraternizing. So that was definitely very interesting.
Yeah, and it was nice to get an additional woman in a major role.
The wife had more of a role as well. So yeah, I mean, it definitely, yeah, it was definitely nice to get that.
Yeah, and they also, I think that he did a better job of assigning faces to a lot of the characters and made them more personal because a lot of them, like in the 1961, the only other one I can remember is the guy playing the harmonica. He offhandedly mentions, you're just a character from a bad movie that I saw once.
Yeah. And
And
then, I mean, you even see it when, she comes in and she's kind of like, oh, what was it like, where's my drink? Or, something like that. It was like you could see sort of those gender roles changing a bit where she's like, oh, whatever, I made a drink. I'm fine. Like this more of an independent woman kind of role as we get into the 80s.
I also thought it was interesting how similar the two main characters looked. Like they had a very similar hairstyle. They're still kind of they look more or less like a generic white guy. Like the Adam Grant in this version, he's played by Peter Coyote, that's an actor that I'm not familiar with, and I wasn't familiar with any of the actors in the 1961 version, which was partially why I didn't, name any of them. And I think that would be true for many of the people listening to this, and unless they're more familiar with 60s era TV shows and movies.
And like silly question, but this is not also Rod Serling, right?
No,
Like,
this is one of those. He was like one of the movie trailer voices, like
oh,
not the big one that was known for like In a World, but
yeah.
but he was one of those guys who also did, a whole lot of trailer narrations in the 80s and 90s.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Charles Aidman, that's who his name is.
Interesting. But yeah, going back to the main characters looking, pretty similar, kind of that same, I think even like similar haircuts and everything. I mean, it really added to the like, this is the same 60s guy, and, he's still going through it in the 80s. He's still, that definitely added to it.
Yeah, and like I was mentioning with the roles, like he points out that the DA's wife is his sister, and it's his sister because his sister hates him and wants to punish him, and so in his dream he's made her into a character that doesn't like him and wants to punish him, and is more or less in the role of someone basically trying to convince the DA not to call the governor. So she's kind of a more of an antagonistic character in this version, even though she's kind of removed and it's almost like a passive antagonism.
Yeah, versus the 60s and oh, I'm tired, I'm going to bed, and then, I'm basically gone. Yeah.
And I also appreciated that, he points out whenever the priest comes in to give him his last rites, he's like, you're my father that's dead. Like, so there is again a more personal connection to this character, and I think in this situation it fits more too because it would make sense that his father would be a character that shows up to give him his last rites in this dream where he is getting killed over and over.
Oh yeah. Oh, I mean, yeah. As soon as the priest comes over and he's like, "Dad," and the priest is like, "Well, I mean, people usually call me father." Like that was both like funny and a little bit, heartbreaking as well.
And I know we mentioned this whenever we were talking about the 60s version, but it is weird that they made the change from the electric chair to hanging.
Is that how they ever like killed people you know, in a death row sense? I mean, that what?
Yeah, I think it has happened in the US, but not since like maybe the early 1900s. I didn't do any research, but I know it hasn't been done at the very latest, and maybe the 40s or 50s. But after that, definitely nobody has been hanged on death row. Um, I imagine it's either the electric chair or lethal injection.
Yeah. I mean, technically, it's a dream. He can dream whatever. He could have dreamt firing squad. I mean, anything, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think that again brings back to what we were talking about before, where this isn't supposed to be reality. This is supposed to be dream reality based on what this character thinks of what would happen. So maybe in this version, like Peter Coyote's version of Adam Grant is maybe a fan of westerns, and even though he's not in like a western style jail cell, he has that tied in of the western trope of hanging, which is pretty prevalent in Western movies and TV shows. Even though in his dream he's modernized it a bit more. And there are, like you said, there's a lot more little details in this. Like I especially noticed at the very beginning, I like how whenever they zoom in on him, you see him like pinching his hand over and over again, trying to get himself to wake up.
Oh, I didn't even notice that. Oh, that's good. I mean, I was thinking more of like, you know, it's like the conversations continue and, into more detail, into more, let's try to convince the wife, um, into, more arguments of, what's reality and what's a dream. I mean, even literally watching the people disappear at the end, one by one disappear at the end was, pretty jarring.
Yeah, which it does follow a very similar beat in the 60s version because the first two things that disappear are two inanimate objects. But in this version, they actually do go the extra step and show the people disappearing as well. And I also, like you mentioned, I think this does a better job of showing that whenever we are seeing the other characters that aren't Adam Grant talking with each other, that it's still a part of Adam Grant's dream because he uses their conversation between the DA and his wife at the DA's home
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
as proof that he's in a dream because he recites basically what the different music choices that his wife suggested. And, maybe we should start a fire. Like he recites her lines exactly in order to convince the DA that he's in a dream.
Yeah, it's more believable in how he's, convincing because yeah, I mean he gives more details, he knows what's going on even when he's, quote unquote not even there. Um,
Yeah, so this does a better job of showing that even though Adam Grant isn't in the scene, it's believable that he is watching it like from a third person perspective. Like in those scenes, it's almost like he's the camera.
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah, I guess. I mean, I guess I can imagine that being how I know you talked about before. Having dreams that were third person, like you're kind of the camera, like it's kind of a movie. Because I'm wondering, watching the episode, how is he just kind of blacking out in his jail experience, and suddenly his mind is on the DA's home, and then he's back again, and the prisoners are there, so he's kind of like switching scenes in his own mind.
Yeah, I also liked the difference about how, even though I didn't like as much how they showed it visually on screen, where they basically cut away and showed it and showed his remembering his trip to the hanging to be hung. Even though I didn't like as much how they showed it, I did like some of the additional details. Like I like how he described the sheets that hung down so you would see and how it was backlit so any observers would just see the silhouette and they wouldn't see the physical body falling. So it was
Well,
more theatrical.
well, even the fact that he had I mean, basically a sack or bag or whatever over his head, and then he can still say, okay, and then this person, that I can't see, right, is doing this, and this person does this, and they flick the switch, or they, well, I mean, I guess the switches in both episodes, they do this, they do that. Um, so he definitely is kind of omniscient as well.
Yeah, and some of the other little details that I liked. I liked how he mentioned in both versions that the sack over his head smelled like an old sofa.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
on
He has
and
a sense of, he can smell in the dream too.
Yeah, which I didn't look it up, but um, I remember hearing that, back in the 50s and earlier, most people actually dreamed in black and white. And it wasn't until, the 60s on through the 80s and 90s that people actually started dreaming in color.
What? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and I think, and again, I haven't done a lot of reading into this recently, but I do think that it has to do with TV and movies,
Hmm.
since they were, back in the 50s and before, they were primarily black and white. And then, once movies were in color, then people started dreaming more often in color. Because I definitely remember hearing that whenever I was a kid, and I was always confused by it because I knew that I dreamed in color. Am I different from everybody else?
I don't know if that shows how much we get from TV and the movies because, I mean, I'm pretty sure the 60s were in color. Like in real life, like real life has always been in color. So I'm a little bit surprised that, people really took from TV that much.
Yeah, that is surprising, and it's something that if I remember, but before I talk about this episode with another guest, I might do some more digging into that and see if I can find some more information on it. But I also love the detail whenever he was recounting that, whenever he talked about the three different men that push the button that release the latch that actually kills him, because that's something else that I've often heard, that would relate to with firing squads. And in firing squads, they would have many different people that would be firing at somebody, um, and the saying is that, either one of them would have a blank or only one of them would have a live bullet, and so that would help ease their minds, so that way they would have that seed of a doubt that they could tell themselves, well, there's a good chance that I wasn't the one that actually killed him, that I was just pushing a fake button, and so that helps them live with themselves, so that way they don't have as guilty of a conscience if there was only one person who was definitely the one was that pushed the button that caused the prisoner to die.
That's smart. I wonder now kind of what maybe the discrepancies are in, how this whole death row process actually works versus what we see here because that can also be, more. I mean, they tell us in the beginning, unlike, at the end you kind of have it was all a dream surprise, but I think it would tell us more if, there were things that were definitely correct when it comes to how executions work.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how it's done. I know, like, in terms of like, lethal injection setups where it's more of the assisted suicide sort of thing. They have it where the person is able to basically trigger it themselves. But I don't think that's really possible in a prisoner situation, because I don't think they could convince the prisoner to push that button themselves.
Hmm. That that makes sense.
But was there any other, like, notable differences between the 85 version and the 61 version that you wanted to talk about?
I mean, I was trying to really notice the set design to see if there was maybe some clues, in the DA's home that could say, oh, this is definitely a dream. I didn't notice too much. I mean, I definitely zeroed in on that lamp, just being there. They both seemed like kind of bare, because I was trying to think of if somebody was dreaming up a home. Would they include little details? I mean, I think the 85 version, it wasn't, maybe, remember, it wasn't as bare if they kind of, there was some more decorations and things in there. Because I know what the courtroom was plain, the jail was plain, but trying to dream up like what, a DA would have in their home, what a family home would look like, maybe would look like, his, Adam Grant's home. But that was just interesting to me.
Yeah, the only thing that I really noticed about the DA's home was I thought that the walls were painted very bright colors. Like his living room was like not a garishly bright, but it was like a pink color, like almost like a salmon color, which I thought was a very unusual color for a living room. And then like his I think his entry room was like a tan color, and I thought that those were just weird color choices for somebody's home.
Maybe more whimsical, or yeah, that's true. I mean, you wonder how much of, whether it be personal experience or in the movies, kind of shape, how he saw different locations. I mean, the jail probably was, well, maybe jail and courtroom were probably things that he kind of thought, okay, on TV, this is how this looks. I wonder if, the home was sort of a, my favorite sitcoms kind of home, or if it was, maybe what his home sort of looked like, or childhood home looked like.
Yeah, I did get a sense. I mean, I might be reading too much into it, but it didn't feel like an 80s style set. Like the DA's home, it almost felt more like a 50s or 60s era decorations.
Yeah, more retro as well. That's
Yeah, but other than that, I think that's about all I have for this episode. Unless there was anything else that you wanted to say.
I think if I think of anything, we'll pick it up in the next part.
All right. Well, once again, I'd like to thank you for joining me today. And why don't you go ahead and remind everybody where they can find you online?
Of course, you can find me on Twitter at PodSocialite. My TikTok is Podcast Socialite. And my Facebook that I use the most is Alice Lauren. Just message me, let me know where you heard me, and we'll chat.
All right. And as always, I am Bubbawheat, and you can find me at flightstights@movienights.com. You can find me on Twitter at Bubbawheat, and you can find this podcast, It's Time to Rewind, on Anchor.fm, as well as anywhere else where you listen to podcasts. I also have a Facebook group, It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group, where you can join to talk about the podcast as well as time loop movies and TV shows and anything else. And if you are on iTunes, I'd appreciate it if you give this podcast a 5-star rating and a review as well to help attract new listeners. So until next time, I will still be here, trapped in the Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval. Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your approval.
Another dimension. Light.
for your
Shadow. Another dimension. Light. Shadow. Another dimension. Self. Light. Shadow. Another Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone. We know that a dream can be real, but what if reality is only a dream? We exist, of course, but how? In what way? As we believe as flesh and blood human beings? Or are we simply playing parts in someone else's feverish, complicated nightmare?